but it's also a warning for the U.S. economy. Instead of vast successes, the company now symbolizes the country's economic challenges.
Well, I think it shakes people in my age group a little bit more than younger people who have seen a changing world and changing automobile world in their lifetime. I just think that the reality is those things are going to happen all the time.
After receiving billions in taxpayer dollars, General Motors' balance sheet problems will affect not only America, but the global economy. It will be forced to shut down more than 40% of its dealerships and lay off thousands of workers. Thousands of other workers from peripheral companies will be laid off as well. Some say the closures were a long time coming. Critics of the car industry say that car makers failed to make adjustments for fuel efficiency standards since the 1970s, setting them up for failures when fuel prices jumped like they did last year. Not only that, rising costs in health care are also hurting the U.S. economy. The impending layoffs are not adding to Americans' confidence either. In a Pew Research poll, Americans said they were less optimistic about their personal progress than at any time in a half-century of polling.
I'm not somebody who has been a proponent of jumping to bail out. I've got to make sure, as I've said earlier, that they have to have a long-term plan.
However, some lawmakers are optimistic about the future of America's economy.
We're seeing commodity prices go up, or wheat prices go up, cattle prices stabilizing. I think all those are good signs.
Tough choices in a struggling economy, where the rubber meets the road in the 21st century. For Press TV, Colin Campbell, Washington.
Well, this is very interesting, and many of the people across the country are feeling that it's already a depression because they are experiencing the anxiety of unemployment, or they are actually unemployed. Diane, could you talk to us about the feelings that people have about whether or not we're in a depression, or is the United States headed toward a depression?
Well, that's difficult to know, actually. Michigan certainly has been in a recession for 6 or 7 years already, and places like Detroit and Flint and Pontiac are the most severely affected in the state. But I think that what's important for us to consider is that we have had an industrial policy in which basically the corporations have been in the driver's seat. They're the ones that have called the shots. And we now, given the layoffs and plant closings, I think have an opportunity to change that kind of industrial policy and say, okay, what are the kinds of jobs that we actually need? Here we are facing climate change with all the problems that we see about toxic waste and so forth. So this is an opportunity to put people back to work doing things that need to be done in our society. So I don't think it has to be the Great Depression or even a recession, but that can only happen if we have good jobs and if plants aren't closed. So that, to me, is what's really important. I would say another factor would be there should be a moratorium on utility shutoffs and foreclosures, so that if a person is without a job, until we can retool and reinvent what needs to be done, that nobody is going to be thrown out of their homes. During World War II, there was a retooling in Detroit. No auto production existed. Within 8 months, the government had changed that situation so that they were producing what was necessary. Well, I would contend there's a war right now in our cities, and that it's the duty of us to retool ourselves and to get busy making the things that are necessary, and will create a better society than the one we had before the recession.
Thank you, Diane. Patrice, what do you see in the forecast? Recession, recovery, or depression?
Well, right now everyone's betting on a recovery in the second half of the year. So you've had quite a bit of euphoria on Wall Street, and investors believe that the economy will start growing again in the second half of the year. It's certainly true that Detroit has had much worse for a long time than the rest of the economy.
Yeah, the
George?
descriptions that she made of Detroit and Flint were accurate when I was out there 15, 20 years ago. So, I mean, this is not a new thing. The problem basically is that until a couple of decades ago, people could go right out of high school with no particular skill, go into an auto plant, count on having a job there at a good wage for their entire career. Those jobs have disappeared, and we haven't been training people that to be able to adjust. I mean, if you look at the kind of skills that are required in today in a lot of the industries, even the ones that people say are similar to autos,
I'm going to have to ask you to put a pin in your thought. We've got to take a quick break for our news. We'll be right back. Welcome back to American Dream. I'm Cynthia McKinney. Our topic today is the U.S. economy and the General Motors bankruptcy. I'd like to thank Diane Feely for joining us on the telephone from Detroit, Michigan. I'd like to welcome Fred Vitale, who is a former Ford employee and is now the chair of the Michigan State Green Party. And joining us in the studio, we have Patrice Hill from the Washington Times and George Eads, formerly of General Motors. Thank you for joining us. Now it's time for us to hear from our men and women on the street. And they were asked this question: is the middle class disappearing?
No, I don't think they're disappearing, the middle class. I think it's a good fresh start for GM.
There are fewer and fewer factory jobs and manufacturing jobs. They've been declining since the 1950s and are declined very fast in this decade. There are a lot of good jobs left in the country in science and high-tech industry and in a lot of the services industries. The question, I think, an event like the GM bankruptcy poses is when you have people who are 50 and 45 and 55 still working, still good at their jobs, but very old and hard to train for new ones, how does the country care for them?
No, I don't. Elaborate on that? Yes. Well, no, I mean, there are, look around the streets. There are all sorts of shops here where middle-class people are working. There are all sorts of, it's true that manufacturing is a less important part of the economy than it used to be 30 years ago, but there are all sorts of other middle-class jobs, truck driver jobs, and jobs working in shops, and all kinds of service jobs, school teacher jobs, nursing jobs, all kinds of jobs. So no, I don't think that middle class is disappearing.
No, I don't think so. Whenever you want to rebuild, you have to destroy first. You have to always destroy, then you are able to rebuild something better. So I don't think that the middle class is disappearing. It'll probably be rough for a little, but eventually they'll come back.
I think that the people that are being affected by these car closures, these car plant closures, those are the people of color. I mean, Detroit, the whole city is built on that industry, and if it goes down, what happens to those people? Now, if we're going to call them middle class or working class, the labels, I would say Americans are being impacted adversely, yes.
Yes, I do. I think that's been coming a long time. It's going to be the rich and then the poor, and I'm middle class, so I know. I really think so. It's been coming a long time.
Well, it's clear that the ramifications of the economic crisis and the bankruptcy of General Motors are enormous. Our reporter, Ernie Cruz, has a report.